In April 2015, a group of pensioners pulled off the biggest burglary in British history. Not young criminals, not tech-savvy masterminds, pensioners. The oldest was 76 years old. They broke into the Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Company in London's Diamond District and stole £14 million worth of gold, diamonds and jewellery. But here's what really makes this insane. They'd been planning it for 3 years. They used equipment from the 1980s. They took 4 days to complete the heist over a holiday weekend, and they almost got away with it. Almost. Because these old-school thieves made one critical mistake that brought them all down. This is the story of the Hatton Garden Heist, the audacious crime that shocked the world. The brilliant planning, the flawless execution, and the stupid error that cost them everything. By the end of this, you'll understand why this heist is called the greatest robbery of the 21st century, and why these old men who should have been enjoying retirement ended up spending their final years in prison. This is true. This is real. This happened. Let me tell you how. Before we get to the heist itself, you need to understand who these men were, because this wasn't some random group of criminals. This was a crew with over 200 years of combined criminal experience. The leader was Brian Reader, 76 years old, a legendary figure in London's criminal underworld. Reader had been involved in major heists since the 1960s. In 1983, he was part of the Brinks-Mat robbery at Heathrow Airport, where 6,000 gold bars worth £26 million were stolen. That was one of the biggest robberies in British history. Reader got caught that time, served 8 years in prison, got out, and went right back to planning heists. By 2015, he should have been retired, playing golf, spending time with grandchildren. But Reader couldn't stop. Crime was in his blood. He'd been planning the Hatton Garden job since 2012. 3 years of surveillance, planning, recruiting. Then there was John Collins, known as Kenny, 75 years old. Collins was Reader's right-hand man, a career burglar who specialized in alarm systems. He could disable security like it was a children's toy. Collins had been arrested dozens of times over 50 years, but had only served a few short sentences. He was careful, methodical, the kind of criminal who studied everything before making a move. Terry Perkins, 67 years old, was the muscle of the group despite his age. Perkins had been involved in the Security Express robbery in 1983, where £6 million was stolen. He'd served 22 years for that. Got out in 2012 and immediately reconnected with Reader. Some men can't leave the life. Perkins was one of them. Prison hadn't reformed him. It had just given him time to plan better heists. Danny Jones, 60 years old, was the electronics expert. Jones understood alarm systems, CCTV cameras, motion sensors. He knew how to bypass them or disable them. He'd worked with Reader and Perkins on smaller jobs over the years. This was going to be his masterpiece, the job that would set him up for retirement. Then there was Carl Wood, 58, the youngest of the main crew. Wood was the lookout and logistics guy. He arranged transportation, storage, equipment. He made sure everything ran smoothly. And finally, there was Billy Lincoln and Hugh Doyle, the hired help. Lincoln was a plumber who had worked with the crew before. Doyle was brought in for his knowledge of the building's layout, not part of the core crew, but essential for the job. These weren't desperate young criminals looking for quick cash. These were professionals, veterans, men who had spent decades perfecting their craft, and they were about to attempt something that would require all of their combined experience. The target? The Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Company, a vault in the heart of London's Diamond District, containing hundreds of safe deposit boxes filled with millions in valuables. And the plan? Wait for the Easter holiday weekend when the building would be empty for 4 days straight. Break in, drill through a reinforced concrete wall, open as many boxes as possible, and disappear before anyone even knew they'd been there. Simple, elegant, and if executed properly, unstoppable. They'd been watching the building for months, taking notes, timing the security guards, mapping the alarm system. They knew the building had CCTV cameras, but they were old, easily disabled. They knew the vault was in the basement, accessible through a small elevator shaft. They knew the wall was thick, reinforced concrete, but they had the tools: industrial diamond-tipped drill bits, hydraulic rams, crowbars, everything purchased with cash. Untraceable, the plan was set, the crew was ready, and on Thursday, April 2nd, 2015, the day before Good Friday, they made their move. The Hatton Garden safe deposit. Company was located at 88 to 90 Hatton Garden in central London. The building was 7 stories tall, offices and businesses on the upper floors. The vault in the basement. Security was light. 1 CCTV camera at the entrance. Basic alarm system. The owners had relied on the building's location for security. Middle of London. Busy street. Who would be stupid enough to rob a place in broad daylight? But Reader and his crew weren't planning a daytime robbery. They were going in at night over a 4-day holiday weekend when the building would be completely abandoned. Thursday night, April 2nd, 9 p.m. The crew gathered at a nearby location. They'd rented a white van weeks earlier. Inside were their tools, drill, generator, crowbars, sledgehammers, bags for the loot. They wore dark clothing, gloves, hats. Pulled low, they looked like a group of old men heading to a construction job, which in a way they were. Billy Lincoln, the plumber, had a key, not to the front door, to a side entrance. He'd obtained it months earlier by befriending someone who worked in the building. Simple social engineering. People trust tradesmen. Lincoln had copied the key and returned the original. No one ever knew. At 9:21 p.m., they entered through the side door, disabled the alarm within 90 seconds. Jones had studied the system for months. He knew exactly which wires to cut. The building was dark, empty, silent. They took the stairs down to the basement. The elevator was too risky, too noisy, too likely to trigger sensors. At the bottom of the stairs was a metal gate, locked. Perkins pulled out a set of bolt cutters. 30 seconds. Gate open. They were in. The vault door itself was massive steel, combination lock, biometric scanner. Impossible to crack without the codes. But Reader hadn't planned to go through the door. He'd planned to go through the wall. The vault was adjacent to a smaller storage room, and between them was a wall, thick, reinforced concrete embedded with steel, rebar about 50 centimeters thick, half a meter of solid concrete. Most criminals would have looked at that wall and said, impossible. Reader looked at it and said 4 hours. They set up the drill, a Hilti DD 350 industrial core drill, used for construction, boring holes through concrete for plumbing or electrical conduits. Perfectly legal to own, perfectly effective at boring through vault walls. Jones started the generator. It was loud, roaring, echoing through the basement. But the building was empty. The street outside was quiet. It was after 10 p.m. on a Thursday night, before a 4-day weekend. No one was around. The drill bit into the concrete. Progress was slow. The wall was thick. The drill overheated. They had to stop, let it cool. Start again. Hours passed. By 2 a.m., they drilled through about 20 centimeters, halfway. But the drill was struggling. The bit was dulling. They hadn't anticipated the wall being this thick. Reader made a decision. They'd come back. Finish tomorrow. Night. They had 4 days. No need to rush. They gathered their equipment, left the building, locked everything behind them, as if they'd never been there. Friday, April 3rd. Good Friday. The building remained empty. The crew rested, checked their equipment, sharpened drill bits, planned the next phase. That night, they returned. Same time, same entrance. The drill resumed. By midnight, they'd broken through a hole about 45 centimeters in diameter, just barely large enough for a man to squeeze through. Reader, being the oldest and smallest, went first. He climbed through the hole into the vault. And what he saw made every year of planning worth it. Hundreds of safe deposit boxes, floor to ceiling, each one potentially containing thousands in cash, jewellery, gold. This wasn't just a score. This was a retirement fund for everyone involved. The rest of the crew climbed through. They began opening boxes using crowbars, sledgehammers, brute force, no finesse, just smash and grab. Box after box, they filled bags, duffel bags, garbage bags, wheelie bins, anything they could carry, gold bars, diamond necklaces, Rolex watches, bundles of cash, rare coins, family, heirlooms. They didn't discriminate. They took everything. Hours passed. By 6 a.m. Saturday morning, they'd opened 73 boxes. They couldn't carry any more. The bags were full. The bins were overflowing. Reader estimated they had between 10 and 20 million pounds worth of goods, maybe more. They climbed back through the hole, loaded everything into the van, and drove away. The entire heist had taken about 9 hours spread over 2 nights, and no one knew it had happened. The building was still empty. The alarm was still disabled. The hole in the wall was hidden in a storage room no one would check until Tuesday at the earliest. They'd done it, pulled off the heist of the century. And now came the hard part, hiding the evidence, fencing the goods, and not getting caught. Tuesday, April 7th. The building reopened after the Easter holiday. At 7:30 a.m. the building manager arrived, unlocked the front door, noticed nothing unusual. The alarm was off, but he assumed someone had forgotten to set it Friday night. He went about his morning routine. At 8:45 a.m., a customer arrived to access their safe deposit box. The manager escorted them to the basement, unlocked the gate, opened the vault door, and froze. The scene inside was chaos. Boxes ripped open, debris everywhere, tools left behind, a massive hole in the wall. The manager immediately called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived. They secured the scene, called in detectives, forensic teams. The flying squad, London's elite robbery unit. The initial assessment was shocking. At least 73 boxes had been opened. The total value of stolen goods was estimated at £14 million. But that was a conservative estimate because many box holders refused to report what they'd lost. Why? Because some of those boxes contained illegal goods, undeclared cash, stolen property, money laundering proceeds. Criminals don't report thefts to the police, so the real total, possibly as high as £200 million. This wasn't just a robbery. This was one of the largest heists in British history. The media went insane. Headlines everywhere. The Great Diamond Heist. Elderly gang pulls off massive robbery. It was sensational, almost admirable. These old men had outsmarted modern security. The police reviewed CCTV footage from the building. They saw figures entering Thursday and Friday nights. But the footage was grainy. Faces weren't clear. The men wore hats, gloves. They'd been careful. Forensics swept the scene, found no fingerprints, no DNA. The crew had been meticulous, but they found something else. A drill left behind with a serial number. The police traced it. Purchased with cash 3 months earlier from a hardware store in North London. The store had CCTV. They reviewed months of footage. And there, a man buying the drill, face partially visible. They ran it through facial recognition. Match Brian Reader, known criminal, previously involved in the Brinksmat robbery. The police had their first suspect. They began surveillance, watching Reader's movements, tracking his associates, and they discovered the rest of the crew: Collins, Perkins, Jones, Wood, all known criminals, all connected, all meeting regularly at a pub in North London. The police planted bugs, listening devices in the pub, in cars, and they heard everything. The crew was celebrating, bragging, discussing how to fence the goods, arguing about splits. They mentioned specific items stolen, described the heist in detail, talked about where they'd hidden the loot. The police had them, dead to rights, but they waited, wanted to recover the stolen goods, waited for the crew to lead them to the stash. And that's when the crew made their fatal mistake. On May 14th, 2015, just over a month after the heist, the crew met at the Meridian Hotel in Hatton Garden. Ironic location. Right in the heart of the Diamond District. They'd rented a room, brought some of the stolen goods, were planning to divide the loot. What they didn't know was the police were watching every movement, tracked every conversation, recorded. Inside the hotel room, the crew spread out millions in gold, diamonds, and cash. They started arguing. Perkins felt he deserved a larger share. He'd done the heavy lifting. Jones disagreed, said his technical expertise was more valuable. Reader tried to keep the peace, but tensions were high. And this is where old criminals make mistakes. They get greedy, they get paranoid, they start fighting. Collins suggested they split everything immediately, fence what they could, bury the rest, wait a few years, let the heat die down. But Wood was impatient. He wanted to sell everything now, make his money disappear. The argument grew heated, voices raised, and all of it was being recorded by police bugs planted in the room. The police knew exactly what they had, where it was, who had taken it. On May 19th, 5 days after the hotel meeting, the flying squad made their move. Simultaneous raids across London. 6 a.m. Officers smashed through doors, arrested Reader at his home, Perkins in bed, Collins having breakfast. Terry Perkins died in prison in February 2018. Heart attack. He was 70. Never saw freedom again. Brian Reader was released in July 2018 after serving half his sentence. He was 80 years old, frail, in poor health. He died in September 2023 at age 84. Never fully recovered the money he'd stolen. Never enjoyed his retirement. John Collins was released in 2019, now in his 80s, living quietly. Refuses to speak about the heist. Danny Jones remains in prison as of 2025. Denied parole, considered a flight risk. Carl Wood was released in 2020. Disappeared from public view. The Hatton Garden Heist remains one of the most famous robberies in British history. Books have been written, movies made, documentaries produced. The story of old men pulling off the impossible fascinates people. But here's the truth that doesn't get talked about enough. The victims, the people whose boxes were robbed, many were ordinary citizens, families who kept heirlooms in those boxes, wedding rings from deceased spouses, jewellery passed down through generations, irreplaceable items with sentimental value far beyond their monetary worth. Those items are gone forever, melted into gold bars, diamonds recut and sold. The victims never got closure, and the criminals, they spent their final years in prison or died there. For what? Money they never got to spend. A legacy as criminals instead of grandfathers. Was it worth it? Reader, in one of his few interviews before he died, said he regretted nothing. That pulling off the heist was the highlight of his life. That dying in prison was better than dying in a retirement home watching television. That's the criminal mindset, the thrill, the challenge, the rush of beating the system. But the reality is grimmer. They didn't beat anything. They got caught. They lost years. They died as prisoners. The Hatton Garden Heist teaches us something important. Crime might look glamorous from the outside. The planning, the execution, the massive payoff. But it always ends the same: prison, loss, regret. These men had 200 years of combined criminal experience. They'd pulled off dozens of robberies, and they still got caught. Because eventually, everyone makes a mistake. Eventually, the law catches UP. The heist itself was nearly perfect. 3 years of planning, flawless execution. They bypassed alarms, drilled through walls, stole millions. But one mistake, one meeting at a hotel where police had planted bugs. One argument captured on tape. That's all it took. So here's the final question. Knowing how it ended, knowing they'd spend their final years in prison, knowing they'd die as criminals instead of free men, would they do it again? Based on readers' interviews, probably yes. Because for some people, crime isn't about the money, it's about the thrill, the challenge of pulling off the impossible. But for the rest of US, the lesson is clear. Crime doesn't pay. It never has. The Hatton Garden crew proved you can be brilliant, experienced, careful, and still end up losing everything. They pulled off one of the greatest heists in history, and it cost them everything: their freedom, their families, their lives. That's the true story of the Hatton Garden Heist. Not a glamorous adventure, but a tragedy. Old men who couldn't let go of the life, who chose crime over peace, who died as prisoners instead of grandfathers. Remember their names: Brian Reeder, Terry Perkins, John Collins, Danny Jones, Carl Wood, not as legends, but as warnings, because no matter how good you think you are, no matter how perfect your plan, crime always has a price, and eventually everyone pays.